Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is Feb 7, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. Especially, we want to give kudos to all the tent wreckers out there in the universe. It's an inside joke. Okay, so it's a real honor and a pleasure to be here with Nick Newlin. Where in the heck are you calling in from, Nick?
I live in beautiful Brandywine, Maryland, which is about 30 miles south and east of Washington, D.C. I live on a 125-acre farm called Imagine Acres with 2 mammoth donkeys, 2 horses, a dog, 2 cats, and a wife. Not
How
necessarily
cool is
that order.
That is so cool. The first question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
I think the best thing for a human being is human connection, because we don't live in a vacuum. I'm talking about aside from basic survival like air and food and water.
Yeah.
I think we need connection with other people one way or another. And it can be abstract through writing or other things. In other words, I prefer face-to-face, and I think most people do. But if you can't be face-to-face, you can communicate and connect with other people through other means.
It's really super. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
I prefer to read it. And one of the reasons for that is because reading is an active occupation, and when you listen and you watch, it's passive. The information is coming at you. When you read, you're coming at the information.
Wow.
Another reason I like my information to come from reading is because the written word tends to go deeper than the spoken word.
It's really cool. Just a sidetrack. Did you become a reader mainly because your parents read? They told you to read as an example. Well, no, your parents read and that was an example. They told you to read, or on your own?
Well, there's no question that my parents reading to me was a huge influence on my own love of reading.
Yeah.
And I think that they read to me in utero. I know my brother did to his children. But I remember one of the things about my young years with my parents, like infant and toddler, is we would all get into their bed, and it was called the nice and warm. And they would read to us. They would read to us in the nice and warm. What could be nicer?
That is so cool. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Well, I mean, I think that what distinguishes humans from most other species is that they have this verbal cognitive brain that tries to make sense of the world. I think other beings just kind of accept the world as is and don't sit around going, I wonder why I have to eat hay or whatever. The reason that we gather and collect information is, I think, to try and kind of make sense out of what might be the chaos of the world, to put things into categories. It helps the human brain. The human brain wants kind of a certain symmetry. And I think that symmetry exists in the universe and that we're just trying to mirror it. But we collect information also so that we can have things, to have things. If we hold things, that means we own things. That means maybe we got stuff. And, people are afraid, perhaps more so in America, of losing their stuff. And that includes information. I mean, I'll give you an example. This is kind of a really offbeat example. But when we lose part of our cognitive function, we lose information. And that can sometimes have serious consequences. I had a friend, actually, this friend used to live in the house I'm living in, he and his father. And this friend had a stroke in his 60s, and then he had another stroke, and he lost most of his ability to speak. He had only 2 words left, practically: girl and money. That was it, down to the elemental. But to my point, the consequence of his losing his information is he had made his money investing online, and he didn't know how to access it anymore. And he lost all of his investments somehow. I don't
Wow.
know. I don't know why. The money managers or whatever didn't kind of ascertain that he had a stroke and help him out. But bottom line is, information is
Yeah.
important to survival in its own way.
Yeah, you're touching on a lot of things we're going to go into. And Nick, is this need or want to collect information more innate in us or more invented by us?
That's a very good question, because I think it's evolved as the information age has evolved. In other words, I don't think humankind per se was as information based back when we were cave people.
Yeah.
We were at a lower stratus of survival. Once all our survival needs were taken care of, and once the technology came in that information became available, I think that we evolved to use it and want it and need it. So, to answer your question, I don't think it's innate, but I think we're evolving into it becoming more innate because, as you know, as we evolve, the species becomes different. And
Yeah, I think that's called epigenetics, but I don't know. But that's really good.
that's a good word.
Do thoughts create emotions?
Um, Thoughts can definitely create emotions. Whether they do across the board, I doubt. I think emotions exist on their own. But I do know that my thinking affects my emotions a whole lot. I've had that experience. I'll give you an example. Excuse me. Back in the early 90s, when I was about 30 something years old, and I was really into my juggling career, and it really mattered that my body worked all the time, and I had a lot of demands on it, and I got tendonitis, and the shoulder pain caused me a lot of emotional distress because I was thinking, how can I do my juggling show, blah blah blah, and I went into a fairly deep depression as a result of this shoulder pain. Now that I'm sort of 30 years older than that, and my life is less dependent on my body, I have more irons in the fire. I can have shoulder pain and go, well, it'll pass. So the same two situations of shoulder pain, the same situation of shoulder pain in my 30s when I was dependent on my body caused me great emotional distress, and it was because of the thoughts about it, not because of the shoulder pain itself. Obviously, because at 60 years old, when I have shoulder pain and I don't think about it, it's just kind of annoying. But my emotions do not follow that thought.
Dude, you're a great communicator because I welcome anecdotes and stories, and that's how you're communicating these answers to me. You go, well, let me tell you, you really put it into context beautifully. I don't know what I think until I fill in the blank.
I don't know what I think until I put it into a sentence.
Wow, that's good because McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. And Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it. But you say, put it into a sentence.
Which could be writing or saying.
Right. And it's great because I told my friend once, Americans talk in half sentences, and he goes, deal with it.
Good advice.
Can humans? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, that's part of the information age that we're living in.
Yeah.
The quantity of words that are used to express things are getting smaller and smaller, and the amount of time is getting smaller and smaller. I mean, just look at how emojis have now taken over.
Yeah.
The communication, and of course punctuation and LOL and all kinds of little abbreviations have made our communication much more tiny, which for better or worse, I think.
Yeah, in fact, McLuhan nailed it years ago. He said, the future of the book is the blurb. And so it's like, so can humans think without language?
I think that they can, because I think that there's a limited amount of what we would call thought that is non-linguistic, but it exists because you can kind of have things come in through your senses and your brain responds to them. People can think, for example, visually,
Yeah.
artists. So there are different modes of thinking and modes of learning. And that's why it's important in schools. If somebody isn't doing well on the writing part, see how they do on the drawing the pictures part. And there's thought that goes into that, but it's not words.
It's good, Nick. Chomsky says the language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
Well, there are various ways that we can communicate with other people that are non-linguistic. For example, when I travel to a foreign country and I do not speak the language, my face can say a lot. My face can say I'm friendly. My face can say I'm needy. My face can say I'm confused. None of those things are being translated into the language, but the face can communicate, and the
Right.
eyes, and of course, every now and then we think we're communicating telepathically, but I've had the experience of thinking that was true and then being wrong. So,
Whoops.
yeah, but definitely we can communicate without language. And of course, art too.
Yeah.
Music is a strong form of communication and there are no words involved in just instrumental music and art, visually.
Yeah. This stupid question, I know it's both and it depends. Are we more human? Are humans more feeling beings or more thinking beings?
I'm gonna give that one the needle going between 50 and 48 because looking at my own life, I'm both at all times, and sometimes I'm tilted more toward feeling, sometimes I tilted more toward thinking.
Yeah,
But back to your point, the tilt of my thinking can affect the tilt of my feeling.
that's it. Bridget Bardot says, when I make love, I don't think. And it's like, good luck. How do you turn your brain off? When you're doing the most sensuous bodily thing, or people meditate, they go, I got to think about not thinking. But you really nailed it. I'm appreciating this because you can't separate feeling from thinking, but we think we can because we invented the words, because they're like
Yeah.
this,
Yeah, and there's no question that they influence each other.
Yeah.
Back to the issue of physical pain. Physical pain, if intense enough, when people have intractable physical pain, it completely affects their thinking. I mean, and part of the reason it affects their thinking is that there are physiological processes that are reaching the brainstem. The brain is a part of the body.
That's psychosomatic zooming, dude. So here's two Alan Turing questions, 1950s. Is thinking a function of the soul?
I do not think that thinking is a function of the soul. I think the soul exists on its own and has a substance to it that is mysterious and that transcends language and that transcends our ability to understand it. But I still believe it exists. But I don't think I don't think that you have to think to have a soul, for example.
Yeah. Second, can machines think?
Well, this is a very relevant question right now. We've been having a little bit of fun, as everybody has, with the new chat bots and saying, chat bot, please write me a poem about a juggler who has a wife who likes donkeys, and it thinks because it tries to scour the information available to it to create a poem using those parameters, but it's not as good. It's not as good. And, it might be good for, writing an interoffice memo or, something, but it's limited. It constitutes thought, however, because and that's why it's sort of fascinating,
Yeah.
because it has elements of thinking which are, logic and taking information and putting it into a shape that and then spitting it out that makes it something people can understand. So yeah, machines can think, strangely enough.
Yeah.
I don't think they can feel though.
Yeah.
That's why their poetry isn't as good.
Yeah. Hey, there you go. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
That's a very good one. I think when I was younger, kid, 20s, 30s, I pursued more happiness just because I kind of, it was out there wanting me to try it and wanting and kind of I could, I could do a lot of things that made me happy. As you get older, you know, there's certain things you can't do, but they're meaningful. And more, I don't actually seek happiness because happiness is a construct that seeking it is a little bit self-defeating. If you get to work and start doing things that are meaningful to you, happiness will come, like that old, butterfly thing. So I think it changed between my first 30 years and my subsequent 30 years from happiness to more meaningful. And I think that's a natural progression as your, body becomes less kind of malleable. And, the things that brought you happiness, you can't do. So you have to find meaning, which brings happiness. And
Yeah.
it's a different kind of happiness.
Well, really well done. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we creating consciousness?
Wow. You mentioned meditation at one point, and I've dabbled in meditation. I mean, maybe more than dabbled. There have been periods of time in my life where I've meditated every day. And even when I go for a walk, I sort of look at it as a kind of meditation. But the consciousness is kind of happening. And one of the things about meditation is, you're not supposed to try and stop it from happening. You're just supposed to let it happen and not give it too much meaning and let it fly
Yeah.
through like a bird. So I think consciousness bubbles up, and I think that out of all that bubbling, we create meaning. But I think it
Yeah.
happens on its own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Well, I guess that the speed of light is something that I can't really see. I'm not familiar with. I know it's very fast. But the speed of light wouldn't even exist if I didn't think about it. So I'm gonna say speed of thought.
Duh. Listen, there's no right or wrong answers, but that one you got right, Nick.
Woohoo!
Out of the ballpark. Okay, so Audre Lorde, the poet, said you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer said you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
For dismantling the master's house.
Yeah, well, let me just clarify. I put these cute quotes in front of some of these questions. You don't have to incorporate the quote into your answer. The basic question is, what tool do you gravitate towards? And then I put new, so you can apply new if you want. Again, you answer the questions the way you want to, but it's sort of implied that way, but however you like.
Well, I think that it's interesting, the quote about dismantling the master's house, because the way I see it, it's kind of, how do we speak truth to power, or how do
Yeah.
we speak our truth
Good.
to what we consider misinformation? And of course, there's a lot of both of those things going on. The division of the master's house having a narrative, and one half of the populace believing that narrative, and the other half believing the other master's narrative. So as far as I'm concerned, the new tool for me, if I were to develop it, would be a tool where I can reconcile things I believe strongly with things other people believe strongly, and hold those both inside of my reality without having one higher than the other.
Wow.
I'm very haughty, about thinking that I'm right about stuff,
Yeah.
and that's a fault, I think, because if I can get down off my high horse and see that somebody's reality is just as valid as mine, then maybe a really interesting conversation could take place. What I tend to do with people whose realities I differ with, people who are close to me, is we just don't talk about those subjects,
Yep.
because it's easier to keep the peace.
Yep.
But it would be cool if I could develop a tool where somehow I was clever enough to be able to talk about those subjects so that we could come to a greater understanding. I mean, another example, my brother in law and my sister in law are fundamentalist Christians, and they believe that homosexuality can be cured, So we don't talk about that because it's like I completely disagree with them.
Yes.
And yet it would make for a very interesting discussion. But somehow or other, every time we've ever brought it up in the past, it's reached a kind of impasse where we have to go, I guess we shouldn't talk about that.
Yeah.
But it'd be nice if I could develop a tool. And I think it requires my humbling myself and opening myself to ideas that I really don't actually believe in at the time.
That's my favorite answer, Nick. People go, the new tool that I don't know exists yet, but I would like to exist. The new tool I'm going to invent. I love that answer. That was beautiful.
Wow.
And it really evoked, McLuhan has a great line. Understanding is not having a point of view. We think understanding is, in order to get the big picture, you have to do exactly what you were talking about. You got like Pascal, the mathematician philosopher, says, in order to understand anything, you have to know this end of the spectrum and that end of the spectrum and everything in between. That you don't, it's not having a point of view. But the follow-up is, what new toy do you suggest?
I think it would be cool if we could have like a toy that was something that we could kind of pass from one person to another, and every time somebody, let's just call it a ball to give it a shape. Every time somebody caught the ball, they would understand a little bit about you, like the vibration of your soul or aura or consciousness would be infused in the ball, and as soon as they caught the ball, they would understand you a little better, and they threw it back to you. You would understand them a little better. So it's like a sentient ball that you throw back and forth that allows you to almost be the other person in a certain way.
That is so cool. You actually beautifully morphed that question into they really morph together. Like the tool could be the toy. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
A lot of times it's mundane things. What by mundane I mean things that that I have to do that I haven't done yet, like or maybe it's if I have an injury or something, I worry about that. But it's not generally big things like I'm not consciously worried that I'm gonna die or get older. My wife sometimes, I think, worries about those big picture things more, like getting old and dying. I worry about the little stuff, which is, but I want to give you another example. Back in about 2007, I had a bunch of injuries, and back pain was one of them. And I read a bunch of books on healing your back, but one of them was by a guy named John Sarno, and his whole deal was basically you're creating that, you're creating your back pain, but then it becomes real because your autonomic nervous system is not supplying blood to those areas because of your worry, or that's a very loose paraphrase. But one of the things he said in that, and actually there was a name for it, was called TMS, the condition of creating pain in your body through your autonomic nervous system, through your consciousness. But one of the things he said underlies it is anger, and anger at the fact that you have to die. That was in the book. And that was interesting to me. It's like, so sometimes I think my worrying about little things are actually my worrying about big things, like my own mortality. It's just that it gives them something to latch onto that are more understandable, like my thumb hurts, you know.
Dude, it's so anticipated. A lot we're going to talk about. Super cool. Nick, McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. This, by artists, I mean jugglers, accordion players, painters, filmmakers, writers, everything. Artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so that we might be able to cope with what we don't like about the inventions. So, Nick, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
I think it has to do with two things that are related. And the first is basically people are trying to survive. And so that's their first dealio. And actually, in Western developed countries, most people have that kind of more or less under control. But really, throughout the world, survival is still a big thing. And when you're trying to survive, it's hard to pick up all the other information because you're focused on survival. My wife is an activist locally in our community and tries to stop bad development. And she's the president of the community association. She has a land trust. She's a real doer and a doer of good. And one of her complaints is, how come people don't want to help even a little bit? How come they don't want to come to the community meeting? And my answer tends to be because they're just trying to get by.
That's it. Yeah.
So I guess that the reason, the answer to your question is, why do they not pick up this information and the stuff from the tools? Is because they're just trying to get by.
Yeah, that's it. Do artists have moral obligation?
Well, I'm going to answer this one personally because I don't want to speak for all artists, but I feel like I have an obligation, and really, the obligation is not to send a certain kind of message. My obligation is simply not to waste my talent and to use my talent to better the world.
Yeah.
So I think that artists do kind of have an obligation, but I think that kind of we all have an obligation, if possible, to use our gifts for good, like a superhero would.
Yeah. Super cool. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
I'm definitely more afraid of old ideas, and I think old ideas are what's weighing us down. New ideas are there's just no limit to new ideas. Some of them might work, some of them might not, but new is good. Old ideas have kept this human race, stultified for generations. Old ideas, I mean, just like, for example, the ideal of male dominance, or that kind of thing. I mean, that's an old idea, but it's still hanging in there. Look at the people in Congress, and look at the CEOs, and look at the earning, and that's just a gender thing. The same applies with race. Very much so, old idea. I was talking today about, I have somebody in my family who's kind of disgruntled. He's a 60-year-old white male, and he's disgruntled about the persecution of white males.
Yeah.
I'm like, really, dude? You're the top of the chain in terms of what you're able to do, and you feel persecuted?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, that's heavy. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
Well, I remember living in France when I was in kindergarten age, and I remember the little puppet shows they had in the park. And it was called the Jardin du Ranelagh. I lived in Paris for 3 years when I was in kindergarten. And I remember the puppets would hit each other, like, Punch and Judy style. And everybody would just go crazy with laughter. So much fun. So one of my earliest memories is of puppets hitting each other and me laughing hysterically.
That is a cool memory. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Well, I tell you what, I think the good memories are a blessing, and the bad ones could be a curse if you focus on them, but they can also be a blessing. So I'm going to say tilting towards blessing, because even bad memories can either elicit change or, you know, the, the important thing is not to focus on memories that are going to cause you ill health.
No.
I'm writing a memoir right now, Jerry. I don't know if I mentioned that, but so I have to go back over these old memories, and I'm going back over some painful periods in my life where I was suffering, and those are good memories because I got through them. So they're good memories, even though I was suffering, because that's the beauty of longevity, is you see that things come around, and so memories. I think memories tend to be good. And also you can learn from them.
Yeah. You're smart. I'm learning a lot. I appreciate this, Nick. Tell me someone within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
First in my immediate family, then outside of my immediate family.
Yeah.
Well, there's no question that my dad was a role model. And what's really beautiful about this is he was a role model for treating people well and being kind and generous, just a fundamental thing. It wasn't like work ethic or strength or blah, blah, blah. It was his kindness, and it continues to be, the way he gives to people. And it's such a powerful thing, and it sticks with me. And I'm really grateful that that's one of the big takeaways from my dad, was his kindness and generosity. The other role model outside of my immediate family, when I was in high school, I went to a boarding school in New Hampshire called St. Paul's School. My parents were living in Brussels at the time, and you had dorm masters. They were called masters. And one of my dorm masters was a psychiatrist named Doc Walsh. And I took a psych class from him. And he also really encouraged me to go to Harvard because he thought the energy there was good for me. And I even dated his stepdaughter. So we had a lot. There was a lot in that relationship. But so fundamentally, he affected me because he got me into psych, and he encouraged me to go to Harvard. But there was another thing that stands out in my relationship with him. When I came back to school the fall term of my senior year, I had an injury my junior year. I had a diving accident. I could have died, but I hurt my neck, and I had some broken bones. And I went into a depression that summer. And when I came back to St. Paul's, I mean, at the time, people didn't treat depression per se. They just, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that they did with talk therapy, but I came back and I was depressed. But because of the way I'm able to use my face and because of who I am, not a lot of people knew it, if anybody. But Doc Walsh did. And he looked at me and he said, some of the light has gone out of you.
Wow.
And then I just talked to him a little bit. And, having one person see that some of the light had gone out of me was so meaningful to me at that time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Super touching. Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
That's an interesting question because, technically we were Episcopalian and we went to the Episcopal Church, but usually only on special occasions, like Easter and or Christmas, blah, blah, blah. But then when I went to Sidwell Friends School in Washington in 4th grade through 9th grade, it was a Quaker school. And although my parents didn't raise me Quaker, that religion was influential in my upbringing because we had Quaker meetings at school, and the philosophy of Quakerism definitely became a kind of part of my worldview, particularly the nonviolence.
Yeah.
And my parents still go to church regularly, but they're not believers. You know what I mean? They go to church because it's a nice ritual and it's part of the community. But neither one of them, I think, believe that Jesus Christ is our Lord or whatever. But yeah, if I had to say the dominant religion in my life, because I went to an Episcopal boarding school too, it's Episcopal, you know, and
Do you pray, Nick?
I consider the kind of meditations that I do, whether it's a walking meditation or even sometimes a musical meditation, I consider that a form of prayer. When we eat dinner together, Joanne and I, we hold hands and we thank God, and we use the word God, but it's not any particular God. We just kind of using the word. We thank God for the food, the shelter, our health, our friends, our family, and we do that every day. And that's definitely powerful prayer, just the thankfulness.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
But how am I going to hear it? I'm going to be well. I guess when you're dead, you can still hear God because he's clever that way. So what do I want him to say? I'd like him to say, it would be cool if he could say, your spirit will continue to exist and affect other beings so long as there is existence. Your spirit will carry on. It'd be cool. It'd be cool if he said that, because it'd be like rocking, spirit.
Yeah, that's Krasner has a great joke. I only believe in reincarnation in one of my past lives. Nick, do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Again, I think that there's a spectrum. And I think that the problem with duality is that it doesn't allow for the spectrum. I think that there are people for whom evil has overtaken much of their being, and then they have become evil. But that's only because it tipped that way. I think that they still have good in them, and other of those human qualities. But I think that somehow or other the spectrum has tilted far enough for them to be considered evil. As far as whether evil exists independent of people, it sort of has to have people to latch onto, doesn't it? I mean, it's weird because humankind are one of the only species that routinely kill a lot of their own species. And that came in there somehow. I don't think it was like invented by one bad dude. So I think evil as we know it does exist and populates and occupies people. But I will have to add that in the grand cosmology of things, I don't think there is evil. I think that we gave it a name for things that are abhorrent to us. But in the grand cosmology, and I once had a very heated discussion with my mom about this, and it was when I was about 18 and I was taking a lot of LSD, and I saw the perfection of the universe, like I was a leaf on a tree, part of the whole thing, and it was all perfect. And so here's what I said to her and tried to explain this feeling that I'd had while tripping. I said, Hitler was perfect. It really upset her, What I was trying to get at was what I'm trying to get at with regards to evil, which is that it's still a construct. Yeah. And I still think that we're all part of a greater thing that sort of defies, that is outside of good or bad. It just has isness.
It's we're all capable of evil, and so here it's really the hidden question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurai, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts, Nick. The basic question is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, I think what he means is if you acknowledge that your enemy is an enemy, because clearly you're going to. I mean, you don't just. I don't know. I don't know what he's saying. He's dead, but I mean, I don't think he means completely ignore them. I think he means don't acknowledge that they're your enemy. Although I could be wrong about that, but I do think that one of the problems is that we have dualistic thinking.
Yeah.
You're either with us or against us.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you're either my friend or you're my enemy. But I see. I think that if somebody asked me, I have an enemy, how should I deal with him? I go back to my thinking. Well, somehow or other, hard as it might be, try and put yourself in their situation and in their thought process, and see if there's anything that you can like find common ground in. I mean, there's a lot of common ground within humanity.
Yeah.
So I think finding common ground, if possible. Now it's tough because you got someone like Hitler that I mentioned, the perfect being, and clearly, and I think when someone is that dangerous, it's hard to be too compassionate. Sometimes you have to take drastic measures because it's life or death. So, and that's the thing is, I'm a really nice guy and believe in not hurting people until it's life or death, and then all bets are off.
Yeah. What's interesting, because you anticipate the next question, Nassim Taleb said games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. So someone, when I read him that quote, said, well, villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. And Gregory Bateson says that when the criminal gets caught, does he go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, hey, I did something morally and socially wrong? So, I mean, anything on these thoughts, but the bottom line question is, does punishment work?
My initial thought is that the idea of punishment works better than punishment itself.
Yeah, that's good.
I think that when people end up getting punished by going to inhumane prisons that are basically businesses, that the punishment in that case doesn't work, and it should be reformed, and it should be more of an educational situation with more compassion built into it. But punishment certainly works as a deterrent. I mean, I think that's, in the Christian ethos and in Muslim ethos too, the idea of a vengeful God is, might keep people from sinning, so the idea of punishment, I think, works to an extent.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't break a bunch of laws. Like, let's say there's some places in our neighborhood where the speed limit, it seems too low, but I know they have speed cameras. So because I've gotten ticketed.
Yeah.
So my not wanting to get punished by paying $40 allows me to drive slower. I mean, I'd be an idiot to keep driving what I consider the normal speed, because it would be too costly.
Yeah. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin about 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, there's a huge difference between being inside yourself and being inside a relationship and seeing a mirror of that. You have the level of removal that allows you to go, those people are behaving kind of like I do with my wife, and look what happened. So, I mean, the reason we do it is humans love narrative, and our whole consciousness is based on narrative and story. I mean, I have a couple of little Buddhist prompts on my desk here,
Yeah.
just to get my head in the right space. If I, want to look at it and get a little mini enlightenment. One of them says, "These are just movies and pictures. They are not reality. We are free."
That's good.
And I love that, But I think the reason we see the movies and pictures rather than live them is because it gives it the level of removal to have an understanding.
Level of removals, great words. Thank you. I need that.
Yeah.
In fact, Hollis Frampton, experimental filmmaker, said narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die. Can you forget to die?
Well, it hasn't happened yet, to my knowledge. I could be wrong, I mean, but I think that you can forget that you're gonna die, and that probably most of us do, because it kind of puts you in a slightly better mood. Although I will say that knowledge that we're gonna die also gives me a kick in the butt, like a more of a carpe diem thing. I have a much more of a carpe diem thing going on at age 63 than I did at age 23. I really feel like, I mean, I'm really not too worried about death, at least not consciously, but I am conscious of time and less of it, which kind of doesn't make me any less. I mean, I'm still kind of very inefficient with my time, but I think I should be more efficient because I don't have as much of it.
Yeah. Really well put. I thought, Nick, you could walk us through just briefly I mean, I see you as three main things. You're musician, a juggler, and a Shakespeare educator. I mean, you could tell me there's much more to your career. You've been many things, but tell me, in your main pursuits and callings, what was the tipping point? Like you're going along, you're hearing music, then when you go, oh, I want to do that. You're going, you saw these shows in France, saw the puppet shows. I imagine maybe that's where you started seeing juggling. I want to do that. And then teaching Shakespeare. Where were your tipping points for your callings?
Let's start with the music one.
Okay.
I took piano lessons as a child, starting at age 7. I wasn't very good at reading music, but I had a good ear, and so we would play the classical pieces, and I would use the music to get me there. But then it was mostly by ear, which sometimes messed me up. Like when I was about 11, we had an international Bach festival, and I got stuck somewhere, and I put a little improvised ending to the Bach piece and went back to my seat, scurried back to my seat, and one of the judges said, "Play it again," and I had to march up and play it again, and it was kind of brutal. And at that point, my piano teacher started moving me towards Scott Joplin and Eric Satie and things that were a little bit more kind of either merry or abstract, and that I could kind of relate to. But the tipping point, I think, for me in music, in my music education and kind of in my approach to music, came when I was about 14, and I was still taking classical lessons, and I was taking them for credit at boarding school. And I had this fine teacher named Mr. Lequier, who was a big burly man with a fuzzy, funny mustache that he kept tugging on. Looked like he'd had harder jobs in his life than piano teacher. And I had a Chopin etude that I played, and I just kind of played it. I had more or less gotten it semi-correct. And he stopped me and he said, "How do you think Chopin was feeling when he wrote this piece?" And I went, "I don't know, happy?" and he said, "Go back and listen to it and play it again." And I listened to it again, and I got much more than happy out of it. Mr. Lequier and I, through a stroke of fate, because I broke my collarbone, ended up doing a two-handed piano recital for our project. I was playing the right hand and he was playing the left hand. And there's a point at that piece, it goes along, but then there's a point where the music jumps up and cries out, And when we got to that point in the concert, we dug in and the music jumped up and cried out. And I felt like I was feeling everything that anybody who had ever heard that piece or played that piece and all the things that Chopin had felt. And suddenly there was like the universe was expanding through this understanding that music was a feeling, and a feeling that we all had and shared. And it's like, and that was a tipping point, because then I started to see music more as feeling and not just as something you do,
Wow. You had an epiphany.
Yeah, I had an epiphany.
That is great.
But the epiphany was spurred by somebody who knew more than I did, that had felt more than I had, and had felt more in music. I had always felt stuff in music, but I somehow or other didn't equate it with the classical pieces I was playing, because I was equating it more with like Rolling Stones.
Yeah, it's like
okay, so that was the first musical epiphany. The one as a juggler was interesting because I took to juggling in college. One of my roommates taught me to juggle, and when he did a couple of tricks like the yo-yo trick and stuff like that, I thought it was like real magic right there in front of my eyes. I really took to it, and I took to it fairly quickly, and I started carrying juggling balls with me everywhere. But at my first Grateful Dead concert in 1978, 5/14/78 to be exact, Providence, Rhode Island. Again, I hate to confess this on the internet, but I was high on LSD, and I don't really hate to confess it because it was cool. And I had the Grateful Dead were playing, and everything sounded so good, and they were having such a good time. They were smiling, and they were traveling around doing this for a living, and I had a vision of myself juggling in the future, not just in the near future, but down the road. And I didn't even know, that it had to do with performing, but I just knew that you put your energy towards something, that it was going to grow and become beautiful, regardless of what it was. And so I carried that vision, but it wasn't until my first juggling convention that the actual nuts and bolts reality of what it meant was. And that was when there was a public show, and the announcer said, "Please welcome," it was a duo called Dr. Hotz and Neon from Now On, a 2-person juggling troupe. So please welcome this duo that's travel all over this great country of ours, making a living performing. And I was like, making a living performing juggling? How's that possible? And once I knew it was possible, it became a goal, and I started performing on the streets, and I ultimately ended up on the Ren Fair circuit. But I had to know that it was possible. And it was the first time I saw people who made a living doing it that I realized, okay, it is possible.
That is cool. The announcer, "You can make a living, Nick."
Yes, exactly. And the tipping point was Shakespeare. The first tipping point actually came at a young age, again, maybe middle school. My mom was a lover of Shakespeare, and I had seen a few Shakespeare plays, but didn't have any memorable experiences. I was maybe occasionally amused, but mostly a bit confused. But then we saw on Broadway a version of The Two Gentlemen of Verona in the 70s that was done kind of in rock style.
Yeah.
And it was sexy, and it was funny, and it was raucous, and they were still using the language, but I got it because it was translated into fun for me. And truth is, Shakespeare, is a lot of fun. Even the tragedies are fun because they're just so freaking rich. And probably the second tipping point simply came when I started working as a intermission juggler for the Folger Shakespeare Library Student Shakespeare Festival, because I saw a bunch of very young people doing really cool Shakespeare and having fun with it, which ultimately, when I got out of grad school several years later, instead of performing for the festival, I started working with kids and bringing them to the festival as a teaching artist. But I think seeing young people perform Shakespeare was a tipping point, because it was no longer something for old white intellectual, people. Right. It was for the people. It was fun. And so the tipping point was, with all three of these things, the tipping point had to do with a feeling,
Yeah.
attaching a feeling to the activity and not just, I want to be good at it or,
Yeah.
something like that. It took it out of the realm of achievement and into the realm of emotion.
Wow. That is so well put. So let's stay on music for a few minutes. You sort of gravitated towards accordion. Now, do you write songs and lyrics? Do you write the music and lyrics for your own compositions?
I do. And I usually start with the words.
Yeah.
A lot of people will start with a lick or something, and they'll build a song around a lick. And there are songwriting teams that sometimes one person does the words and the other person does the music, which is interesting. I usually start with the words. I think just because I'm a words kind of guy, that's kind of
Yeah.
where it starts. And the rhythm of the words, and then I usually sit down at the piano and try and get a melody out of it and or a chord progression. But it comes second. It's rare that I have a chord progression and or melody that I then put words to.
Well, so a screenwriting teacher told me great film or great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're writing a song?
It's a good question because I'm kind of writing the song for myself and for others. And those two things are slightly different. I want it to be accessible to people, but I also want it to have meaning for me. And it has to have meaning for me or it's not going to be accessible, but, or it actually could, I suppose, just through craftsmanship. But my intention starts out that I want to say something. And I'm not entirely sure what I want to say when I start, but usually as the piece progresses, the writing down of words kind of gets me to thinking about what I want to say. So sometimes I don't know what I want to say. And so I just have to write stuff down that comes to my mind. But there's where the advantage of just showing up, with pen and paper is good, because if you don't write the stuff down, you're not going to get to the next step. So sometimes the best way to write songs is just to really get in the habit of writing stuff down.
Yeah, it's amazing because you sort of answered this, Nick, but Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your listener when you're writing your song?
These days, when I write a song, I want it to go in the band, and our band is called Zydeco Jet. It's a 6-piece band, and we play locally in the DC area about once a month. So we have an audience and we have a sound. We call our sound roots rock and Grateful Delta.
That's cool. Roots rock. And
yeah, our drummer made up that phrase, which I think is wonderfully apt. So I do think about the audience. But prior to that, a lot of times I would write songs and poems for the juggling show. And again, I was thinking of the audience. But there are, in my vast stash of notebooks through the years, plenty of songs and or poems that I just wrote, not really caring who was going to read them, because I thought it was, I don't know, I wanted to write a poem or a song. So the answer is, my intention is group specific or task specific for certain things. And at times it's just a writing for writing's sake, but I still hope that it will turn into something. And I would hope that someone would listen to it, because of writing this memoir. I'm going back over my old notebooks and I find all these poems or songs that I've written that have never seen the light of day, that I've never even read out loud. The other day, I just read one to my wife because she happened to walk in the office, and it was fun to read it. I was sort of like, that's a great art is not just writing stuff down, it's revision. If I want to go find some great art, I can just go back to my old notebooks and turn some of those into great art, you know.
That is cool. That's really great. It's a project I'm working on right now. The purpose of archive. Why do we archive? Why do we save all this crap? Because it's us and it's valuable. But, Copeland says the four elements of music are melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color. How do you navigate those? Melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color. Like, is there one that's more dominant for you? You do an equal blend, you start, a certain way. What do you think?
Well, I would have to say, in my case, since I start with the words, that the first thing I'm concerned with is rhythm.
Yeah.
The rhythm of the words. It has to work. And one interesting thing about that is I find myself getting a little too rule bound. And if I free myself up and say, look, not every second verse has to rhyme, particularly if it says something you want to say, so I think it's a rules are made to be broken thing. But
Yeah.
But I start with rhythm, and I think that the next one would have to be melody.
Yeah.
And the third one, harmony and tone color. Well, the third one would be harmony, and the final one is tone color, because that's when you're playing more than when you're writing. Although plenty of people, classical musicians, write with notation that indicates forte or pianissimo. But and I do think about that, particularly with regards to dynamics. Having some verses have a more gentle tone color, and some have a more strident tone color, but that usually happens last. So the order for me in navigation is rhythm, melody, harmony, and finally tone color.
Beautiful. Nick, my friend says the 3 T's of music are taste, technique, and theory. You've learned the technique, you learn the theory. How does one acquire taste?
Well, I mean, I think you need to be exposed to music in order to know what it tastes like. It's weird to me when people don't listen to a lot of music, because I listen to so much. It's weird to me because it's so fundamental to me. And it's also weird to me. Well, I won't say weird, but I think my tastes are far more eclectic than many people. And mostly it's because I listen to so much music, and that a certain genre will make itself available to me through my travels or through my sort of adventuresome ear. So my taste in music is so eclectic. I mean, there's certain things I like more than others, but I love Brazilian music. I love New Orleans music. I love rock and roll. I love jazz. And then when I do my what I call my Nick yoga at night, I like to turn on the Sirius XM station called Spa, and that's just ambient, mood music, like as if you were getting a massage, and I'm not going to listen to that any other time except for 11 o'clock at night when I'm decompressing. So to have a taste, you need exposure.
Yep, that's the word I get the most on that. But I followed up with a quote from McLuhan. He said, "Song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference." Any comment? And I'll read it again if you want.
I'm not going to agree with that per se. And the reason I'm not going to is because not all music contains language. Much of it is instrumental, so I don't get it.
Yeah.
I don't get how you have to have language difference in order to have different music, because, I don't, probably more music doesn't have lyrics than does,
Well, it's great because the follow-up is, tell me an instrumental that makes you laugh.
Oh, it would be Spike Jones, because he goes, well, but ding, you know, and it's like, oh, funny sounds, you know, it's like there's a party in my ears, you know.
I love it. What's more fundamental, music or language?
Fundamental. Well, I guess in certain respects, music is more fundamental because it transcends language. In other words, you're living in Paris and you're living in Iran, and you know, you guys listen, an Iranian and a Parisian listen to the same music. They're sharing it. It's the same music, but the language, you know, they start talking to each other. They're not going to understand each other. So I would say music as a result, because it transcends language.
Beautiful. Monk says there's no wrong notes. Any comment?
Well, I think what's cool about improvisation is that accidents can be repeated and therefore become part of the song. And that applies to juggling too. You know,
nice.
When you're juggling, your goal theoretically is to keep the balls in the air and or the objects. And a lot of times in a like a competition at the International Jugglers Association, you know, everybody's looking, and then the thing drops and everyone goes, oh, you know, he dropped one. But when you're in a comedy juggling show, you drop a ball and you go, look over there, or almost dropped one, or, you know, high gravity zone, or, you know, you respond. Yeah. And then you drop it again and you say, drops are a sign of progress. And, you know, so, and there's an anecdote that I love by Herbie Hancock. So he was playing with Miles Davis. You know this anecdote?
Oh yeah, that's a beautiful. Yeah,
for the people that don't know it, he was playing with Miles Davis in the '60s in Europe, and you know, he's playing with the big boys. I mean, this is a big trio, or quartet, and they're killing it. You know, they're just smoking, and then Herbie Hancock lays out this big clam, this mistake as far as he's concerned. Just, oh God, he's mortified, you know. And then Miles Davis somehow takes the tones of that note and repeats them and makes them work within the context of the song. It's alchemy, you know. But you know, I've made mistakes in musical improvisation on the piano, and then just repeated them.
Yeah,
not a mistake anymore.
I'm glad you brought up Miles, because he talked about the space between notes. How do you navigate or even know how to utilize silence, which is again a word you brought up just now, dynamics? How do you learn that sense of when not to play?
I think it's my biggest challenge as a musician, knowing when not to play.
Yeah.
I often just feel like I always have to say something, you know. But you know, I took piano lessons with a guy named Rick back in I can't remember his last name, but in the 80s. And he was a professional jazz player and played out. And I tried to sort of pick up some jazz techniques from him. And he said he was playing at a club, and a famous guy like Coleman Hawkins or something came in. And he's taken a solo. And then he has like a half a measure where he doesn't play anything. And that's when Coleman Hawkins went, yeah, you know, and it made an impression on him.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a fan of the Grateful Dead, and Bob Weir is a rhythm guitar player, and most rhythm guitar players in bands go like this, chung, chung, you know, they're hitting chords, right, power chords.
Yeah.
And and Bob Weir has a very delicate style where he kind of plays on the offbeat.
Yeah.
And I was listening to a fairly rare isolation of one of his tracks, because normally when they multi-track, all the instruments are coming in, but he was working on his equipment or something, so they hit isolation of his track. And the thing that struck me the most was how little he was playing.
Yeah.
You know, and I just thought, beautiful. You know, that's how come I like the Grateful Dead so much. It's like I can hear every instrument. Yep. And it's a huge challenge for me. And I feel like I'm constantly relearning it every time I play.
Yeah.
So it's the hardest thing. But I think it's also hugely important.
It's huge. Monk said, silence is the loudest sound in the universe. So Ben Ratliff is a music writer. He means, well, he says, I mean sound as it has long functioned among jazz players as a mystical term of art, as in every musician finally needs a sound, a full and sensible embodiment of their artistic personality, such that it can be heard at best in a single note. So me and you could hear Miles bap and we'd go, oh, that's Miles. So Ben said, oh, that's fragile and pointed. Says train, Coltrane. Oh, slightly undercooked and urgent. So if a writer that you really respected in music summarized the Nick Newlin sound in 2 words, what 2 would you feel, hey, he got it?
Ebullient and nimble.
Oh my God. What's the first one mean? I'm not ebullient and nimble.
Ebullient. It means a sort of a joyful and enthusiastic.
That is so cool.
I'll look in the dictionary what it actually means according to them.
That was good. What I like you put in your own words. What does nimble mean in another word?
My fingers move rapidly, and they skip over the keyboard. I'm able to move swiftly up and down the keyboards. Nimble.
Yeah, nimble. I see. Great.
In a dictionary, say characterized by ebullience, having or showing liveliness and enthusiasm.
Yep, you got that.
But you know, nimble. I mean, I think that I like it when other piano players can really move quickly. But again, you know, it has to be tempered. Otherwise, there's nothing for it to move quickly against.
Yeah, yeah. We got obsessed with too much speed and too many notes. It's like, yo, slow down, you know. So, Nick, what was the motive of the cave artist? Your hunch?
Oh, I think that the motive was probably to kind of, you know, make sense of activities, give them, you know, a shape, so so that you could look at them and understand your life, just the way reason we have film and theaters for that level of removal. I think the cave artist just liked that level of removal where he could sit back and go, that's what I did to that yak.
Yeah.
I put a spear in it. And maybe next, it's sort of like a motivational drawing. I should do that again.
That's good. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Well, I think you can have conviction to compromise. So therefore, I'm going to say conviction, because conviction can go a lot of places. Compromise is awesome, but it only goes one place. It goes to compromise. Conviction actually can take a number of different routes. For example, I might have a conviction to compromise, and that doesn't work. So I'm going to have a conviction to, run away, or conviction to transcend. Conviction has a lot more avenues it can go to.
Good. T.S. Eliot said, poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
Well, I mean, I think it's the language of words and feelings. In other words, sometimes it's the inner dialogue is trying to figure stuff out, which is the words part, and sometimes it's trying to put words to feelings.
Yeah.
So but it's all in English.
Yeah. Two of my film heroes have this mantra. George Manupelli says, ignore yourself. Jonas Mika says, there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art making, music making more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever technologies, cultures, and environments are dominant?
Well, I think in the big picture, it's the latter. I think that I'm a vehicle for everything that is coming through me and is around me. I'm a product of it, and my favorite musicians and my favorite times as a musician are when I feel like I'm a vehicle,
Yeah.
because the stuff is happening. It's there. The music is there. All of that is there. I think I'm a vehicle, and if I'm definitely through the vehicle, I'm expressing myself, but it's really not just myself. It's I'm a product of everything that I've ever seen, felt, heard, that is inside me generationally, DNA. I mean, there's so much more than myself at work here. I have a strong feeling that I am a self, but as a fan of Buddhism, I have come to the conclusion that I'm not sure how much of a self I really am. I just think I am one.
Wow, Nick, can art making be egoless?
No, I mean the ego is what what knows what a straight line is versus a squiggly line. I mean, ego isn't all about the classic kind of feeling that he has a big ego. Ego is just a logical part of our brain that can put things into shapes. And I suppose that even very abstract art making, it has a purpose to break shape or defy shape, but it still has ego in it. Conscious thought to try and make some statement, pattern, expression. Yeah, I don't think it's egoless.
Is perception reality?
Well, that's sort of there are two ways I see perception. One is perception can come in through the senses. You can have sense perception, and I think to a degree that's reality. But I think our perceptions in our mental formations are definitely one of many realities, and we've made a choice to to perceive one that fits our current narrative. I was telling you about the things on my desk, and the first one was they're just movies and pictures.
Yeah.
Here's the other Buddhist one. It says, "Are you sure of your perceptions?" Because we're so sure of stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm not so sure. And it's very freeing when you can be not sure, because you can be hanging on to really very painful thing. And then if you're like, hey, maybe that's not actually happening. Woohoo! About face.
That is really good. Yeah. I love Lily Tomlin says, reality is just a collective hunch.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me one major element of your creativeness that stayed the same and one major element that's changed in the years you've been doing this.
The one that has stayed the same is the spontaneity.
Yeah.
And the speed. One of my characteristics, I believe, as a human, is that I'm kind of quick to do things, for better or worse. I'm able to move quickly. I have a decision and I'll act on it. That can be dangerous, but most of the time it served me all right. But by the same token, the thing that has changed is I'm more apt to spend more time on a creative work before giving it to the people. There's
Yeah.
there's more revision. There's less like write a song and it's done.
Yeah.
So spontaneity is the same, but the thought process and the understanding of the importance of revision has increased. And
Yeah.
I love listening to early versions of like a Bruce Springsteen song that are not nearly as good as when he sat down with his notebook and really
Yeah.
wrestled it to perfection. And so I really, along with silence and music, the other thing I need to remember, and it helps being in a writing group, is revision is where the real art of writing takes place.
Excellent point. Really true. Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength, rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Yeah, it's interesting about Feldenkrais.
Did you pursue him in any of your healings?
I did. But very tangentially, and I took Alexander technique classes for a while, and I didn't really get it.
Yeah.
And I thought Feldenkrais. I read more about Feldenkrais. I never practiced it.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, and what it reminds me of, the turning strength into weakness is kind of an aikido sort of thing, where you
Yep, it is.
you take the negative energy or the negative energy from your opponent and you move it, around. But back to your question, I think that probably one of my weaknesses has been in the past circular thinking and obsession upon a given malady or trouble, and the way I've been able to turn it into a strength is to, and this happened largely, I think, through cognitive behavior therapy and also studying Buddhism, but the way to dispel that is to if you thought your way into it, you can think your way out of it. And so while it's happening, while the thinking is happening, I can have the other thought that is, again, a level of removal that says, okay, this is your brain doing this thing. Just let it do it, but don't attach a narrative to it.
Yeah.
Just like with meditation, you're not actually trying to stop thoughts. You're just not trying to attach a narrative to them. And so my my thinking and thoughtful brain has got me into trouble, but it's also got me out of trouble. You can think your way out of it too. And I think in this case, it is very verbal and conscious. It's not just, it's not just meditation. It's more, it's different. It's using logic to get yourself out of something. For example, you can ask yourself, if you're obsessing about something, you can ask yourself the simple question: is this helpful? Is this thought process helpful? Right?
Yeah.
And by asking that question, the answer is, of course, no. And so there you have the level of removal, even just by asking yourself the question. So I don't know. I guess that's a weakness turned into a strength to a certain
No, that's really well put. And I love how you continually use this level of removal, these three words.
Yeah.
Is that something, those three words you learned from a certain practice, or where'd you get that level of removal? I really like that.
Interesting. I think more than anything else, I got it from Buddhism.
Yeah.
Because I just love the idea that we have a thinking brain that tells stories, and we believe those stories, and we latch onto them, and they become a reality, for better or worse. And that's fine. You need some kind of reality. But in the instances of which there seem to be many, where your brain kind of grabs a hold of an idea and it causes you pain, how about just letting the thought happen and saying, thank you, thought of this. It's like a very strong technique in some of these therapeutic practices, which are like cognitive behavior therapy. There's another one called acceptance and commitment therapy. And in that one, what you do is, let's say I'm obsessing that my shoulder hurts. And so you say, thank you, brain. I hear you obsessing about your shoulder hurting. Go ahead, do your thing. I got to do something in line with my values and activity, but go ahead and do your thing. I'll accept it. I'm not going to try and stop myself from thinking that my shoulder hurts, but I'm just going to let it be background noise, and the concept of background noise is huge for me these days. And I'll tell you why specifically that it became very good metaphor is because over the past, I don't know, 5-6 years, I started to have a ringing in my ears, tinnitus. Yeah. And it was, it's because of rock and roll and hearing loss and et cetera. And it was really bugging me for a while. And then I read this cool book about, neuroplasticity. And what the book basically said is, look, let your freaking ears do whatever they want to do, it's not going to hurt you.
Don't worry about it.
Let them do whatever they want to do and get to work. And then sure enough, your tinnitus just recedes in the background. You only notice it when you think about it, So background noise is a hugely helpful thing for stuff that is bugging you. And it's the same thing with level of removal about thoughts that are bugging you. They're there, but they don't have to be your one reality.
That's really what Nick reminds me of. When my grandmother was in an elder's home, someone yelled out, "Let tomorrow worry about itself." I thought me and you, we'd be wacky doodle the whole time, just like Grateful Dead out. And it's like been a spiritually moving, high wisdom. Like I've learned the lessons of life from the guru. It's like you go to the guru and you go, Nick, what's the best question I can ask you? And you go, the one you just asked me. So, I asked for 90 minutes and we only got 3 more. Can you go longer, or what's your time limit?
I can go a little longer. I got some house guests and at some point they're going to make dinner. I told them I was going till 8, but it's not a hard stop,
Okay. Well, let's go maybe 5 or 10 more. Is that okay?
Sure. No problem. Okay. I have 7:49. So according to me, I have 11 more minutes.
Okay, cool.
But I can do longer. I can do 10 after, whatever. It's not a hard stop.
Okay, good. Anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank.
Well, anger can be a productive emotion when it elicits positive change.
Yeah. What's the most significant difference between men and women, physical aside?
Whoa. I would say the significant difference is that women can bear children. Oh, physical aside, I'm sorry. Yeah. I was getting physical. I want to get physical. It's a tough question because we fall into gender stereotypes, but I have been married and living with a woman for I guess 3+ decades.
Yeah.
So I should know a little something about the difference aside from the physical differences. I would say in general, women are less concerned with having the power, the ultimate power,
Yeah.
They're more interested in helping things to grow, and nurturing. And the men are not so, these are generalizations, but I think that, again, as far as the level of power need in men is greater than in women, so it's not either or, but I think men, for some reason, and maybe dates back to the caveman times, are more concerned with power and dominance.
Yeah.
Women are more concerned with nurturing and helping things grow. God bless them.
Beautiful. You create what you resist. I'm not saying you, Nick, but it's a thought. Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into you are what you hate. James Joyce said it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. And Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, "Thank God I'm an atheist." So, how do you feel about this line? You create what you resist. I'm not, again, I'm not saying you, just one creates what one resists. Any thoughts on that line?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I'm a pacifist and I'm willing to fight to the end for it. I just wanted to say that line. But I do think that to a certain degree, it goes back to the idea of creating narratives, that our brain, our human brain wants to create a storyline. It really likes storylines. And so let's say, going back to my differences in approach towards shoulder pain between age 30 and age 60, I created a narrative when I was 30 that shoulder pain was just the big enemy, the big threat to my livelihood, to my happiness, but I created it. Every now and then I would talk to a wiser person, a wiser older person. And have you heard of Patch Adams? There was a movie, Patch Adams, about the real Patch Adams, who is a clown doctor, but he's from my neck of the woods. And actually my voice teacher was his housemate. So I got to know him over the years. I'd hang out with him after the voice lessons. And every now and then when I was in crisis, I would call him, just to have a talk. And it was during this time when I was having shoulder pain and worried about juggling. And he's like, well, so what if you didn't juggle at all? And what else could you do, And could you do stand-up comedy? Don't need your shoulders for that. Could you sing? Don't need your shoulders for that. So he leavened the threat of shoulder pain by giving me kind of options. I had created the enemy, shoulder pain being the ultimate enemy. And now shoulder pain is sort of a pain, but it's not the ultimate enemy because I know that I can do other things. So I do think we created. I mean, and there's no question that the environment and that life itself will come at you with things that are threatening your very well-being and your very existence. No question about that. But people who are quadriplegic, you become quadriplegic in an accident, they go through a real progression. And it's just like, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was talking about the levels of dying, denial, etc., down to acceptance. But, my dad is in a wheelchair now, and he lost the ability to walk. His nerves of his legs weren't communicating with his brain correctly, and so he can't walk. And I've seen that process with him. At first it's a huge mourning process because you walked your whole life and now you can't do it anymore. But at some point it's adaptable, and if you have the proper malleability, you can incorporate it into the new you, who still has all those beautiful qualities that I mentioned about my dad: generosity and kindness and being great with people. You don't need to walk for that. So we create a lot of stuff that we resent. And again, I'm sort of talking, and I always have to acknowledge this, I'm talking as one of the most privileged, powerful demographics on the planet, a white male who has plenty to eat and a shelter. So, I think that when you're in war in Ukraine and bombs are falling on you, it gets pretty hard. It gets pretty hard to say you're creating what you resist. You're just freaking resisting what's threatening your very life. So, it comes down to, I have the luxury to create what I resist.
Yeah. Really touching, Nick. And I love those words, the new you. I need that. I'm going to tell Susie to write a song, the new you.
Yeah.
That is a great 3 words, dude.
Yeah, because really every day is a new you, isn't it? I mean,
it's always, but
every moment could be a new you.
But saying, I'm in a wheelchair. When you were describing your dad, I was saying, I can't imagine when I cannot ride a bicycle, because I ride a bike 3 times a day. And it's like, what? And sometimes I'm on it and I go, is there going to be a time where you can't just jump on this and you feel this, like just luxury, really, and beauty? It's just so amazing. Okay.
Yes.
So
And
how do you, yeah, go ahead.
well, I think when we lose those things, it's hard, because we're so used to them. And I'm like you. I really love being able to do things with my body, my
Yeah.
hands and
Yeah.
particularly my hands and my arms. I really love what I can do with them.
Yeah.
But I think what you have to somehow learn is how to get those feelings non-corporeally, and
Yep.
it's possible
Yep.
to do that. It's just a real challenge.
Yep.
We're so attached to our bodies, and with good reason.
Yep. Hello. So how do you find peace of mind?
I think I find it by going back to what we were talking about before, by kind of letting go of my narratives.
Yeah.
Just and letting the troubles I have, the quote troubles I have, become background noise, because there is actually a life force that is pulsing through us, just the way there is in a tree, and trees don't have to have peace of mind because they don't technically have minds, although it's been shown that trees can communicate with each other through the root system. It's not a mind, but it's a communication. But we're pretty sure trees don't have feelings, but they're living. And so sometimes if I want to kind of get rid of my what's bothering me or have some peace of mind, it's just kind of like understand that I'm just kind of living. And that's cool. And it's pretty awesome.
It's very awesome. These are 5 Alan Watts questions off the top of your head in just a couple words. 1, who started it all?
I'm just going to say energy.
2, are we going to make it?
Always.
Where do we put it?
Everywhere.
Who's cleaning it up?
Not me.
Gee, the first 3 were so good, and then you blew it. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I just had to. I had to kind of not be. The reason I said not me is because
all right.
My wife Joanne is, God bless her, is so conscious of trash and garbage, and we have a trash can. We tried to put a lot of stuff in it, but the question she asks is, where is a way? I'm going to throw this away. Where is a way?
Where is a way?
I'm definitely not cleaning that stuff up. I'm not. I'm just getting rid of it, And I try to do, better than most, and I do better than a lot of people, but I still, there's a lot of a way that goes on in my life, and I'm not cleaning it up.
Tell her I'm a dumpster diver, and people go, that's so cool. And it's like, are you kidding me? It's like going to Costco every day and just, you're still a fucking consumer and you don't pay. So what? You're still a consumer. You consume because, and it's like, who invented garbage? There should be no garbage. It should be, we're always upcycling and recycling everything, but it's like ridiculous. It's a free for all. And it's like, where is a way? I'm going to throw this away. I'm going to say,
where is a way? Yeah. It's
There's so many
somewhere.
ways.
That shit is not going away.
Yeah.
It's somewhere. But I'm not cleaning it up. All I do is dishes. That's the only thing I clean up. And dog poop. And the dog poop doesn't actually, it goes to the compost.
There you go.
No, it goes in the gully. You don't put dog poop in the compost. You put it in the gully.
There you go.
But yeah.
If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Don't worry about it.
Good. Which way should toilet paper come off the roll? Over or under?
Over all the way. Under is just completely insane. Who would do it? The only reason you would put it under is if you had a cat that went like this and, you know, otherwise it makes absolutely no sense to put it under. None whatsoever.
Well, this question,
I want to give my toilet paper a little tap and have like 3 or 4 squares. You know what I mean? I don't want to be like, eh.
This question applies. If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
Witty Fool, Adventures of a Traveling Juggler.
Is that your memoir's title?
That's my working title.
That is cool. Witty Fool. You know
it's from Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. A Feste is talking with the Lady Olivia, and he says, better a witty fool than a foolish wit.
Oh, that is good. Because you know, Oscar Wilde said, the fool that persists in his folly becomes wise.
Yeah.
It's
like a jazz when you make a mistake and repeat it, right?
Hello. They want to scent the glue in your binding of your memoir, Witty Fool. What smell?
Ginger.
Nice. If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed, and what would it be made of?
Let's see. I mean, I kind of like it to be made of like, crystals, just because they reflect and refract a light. And as far as where it would be displayed, I mean, I think it should just be displayed like right at our, the front of our driveway.
Nice. Nick, tell me something
so you
good.
Can welcome people in with like rainbows, right?
Yeah. Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Something good that I never had and that I never want. Wow. Okay, here's one. Birthing a child physically.
That is Rabbit Test. You know whose film I showed it? Joan Rivers made a film. Billy Crystal was a male who gave birth. Yeah, it's good. You never had it and you never want it. That giving birth, that is an amazing answer. I've never had that answer. You're smart, man. Okay.
Go on.
Okay, well, how about this one? If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
Well, first of all, I'd exhale sharply, and then I'd see if I could kind of shake this shit off my face with this, and probably hurt my neck in the process because I really want that shit to be gone, and I wouldn't have my arm. So the first one would be exhale sharply and then shake my head vigorously. That's all I got.
That is a good answer, man. What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
I think this harkens back to my answer about, the demographic of the white male. I think the cultural shift that I enjoy is that underrepresented groups, and as well as people who are of different ethnicities and of different sexual preferences and gender identities, all of those things are getting more accepted slowly. And it's absolutely true. We had an African-American president. We have a secretary of transportation. Maryland has its first black governor. those are the cultural shifts, the inclusivity of ones who are not old white males. That's, in this culture, but I think in general too. I mean, there's plenty of backsliding, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. Couple more, Nick. We're out of here. Thornton Wilder said in 1928, art is confession. Art is the secret told, but art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for over 90 minutes. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
I think that ultimately it's going to be the battle of hope versus despair.
Yeah.
And, there have been times in my life, fortunately, they had a beginning and an end, but there have been times when despair was winning. So I know what that's like, and it ain't pretty, So ultimately, I think in life and for all lives, you got to get up in the morning and think there's hope. Otherwise, yikes.
Yeah. What gives you the most optimism?
The fact that so many things have worked out already.
Yeah.
I've been super lucky in my life, and therefore I have basis for optimism.
Yeah.
Things have gone right for me far more than they've gone wrong, and I'm just extremely lucky. I think that it's past positive experiences have led me to be optimistic. There's another factor though, and I think I got that from my parents too, and from my dad and from my grandmother, and also from when I've been in times of trouble, I've gained a lot of strength from people who write or tell stories about overcoming really hard difficulties. Sometimes other people's stories and other people's behavior and other people's art and other people's writing give me optimism because they inspire me. Other people can do it. I maybe I can too.
Yeah. It's cool because I wanted to thank you for doing our Shakespeare salon there a while back on this very channel. It was really fun with Stevie, and I would love to do a future salon on the dead. I haven't done that yet, and we could really do that deeply. But just summarize, just a bonus question in a couple briefly. How did the dead shape your behavior?
Basically, the greatest gift they gave me was the hope and really the belief that I could pursue something and put energy into it and it would grow into something, and it didn't have to have an actual practical application at that juncture. It just that where you put your energy could create beauty and joy, but it was a work ethic too. You had to keep at it. It wasn't just believing in it. There was a certain amount of nose to the grindstone too that I was seeing, and so I think that what made it different from a lot of the other achievements that I'd seen was that it was really fun based, and really joyful, and therefore kind of didn't feel like work. And what a great thing!
Yeah. Yeah. Fun based is really cool. And we will survive. I asked all these same questions to your sister. So that was a joy and a pleasure too. Now to figure out how she answered them and how you answered them. So, the first question is, what is the best thing for a human being? And you nailed it. You said human connection, because I got that from Wilhelm Reich. And he said, the best thing for a human being is another human being. And the last question is, what gives you the most optimism? And that's Groucho Marx. They asked him that at the end of his life. And he said, what gives me the most optimism is other people. So, it's sure been a pleasure spending this time with another person, especially you, Nick. People don't know what the in joke we started with tent wrecker, but besides being an amazing musician and Shakespeare educator and juggler, you're one hell of a tent wrecker, dude.
Thank you, Jerry. Coming from you, I can see it only as a compliment because
but
that's the way things sound when they come from your mouth, and I believe them.
Right. Who are you going to believe? My eyes or your own? But that's like, I didn't come up with that word. You came up with the word. You said you were describing your life to us once, and you said, well, I guess I was a house wrecker, but well, I didn't live in a house. I lived in a tent. So I guess I was a tent wrecker. So I told Susie today, I says, yeah, I'm going to be interviewing that old tent wrecker Dick again.
Yeah. Well, sometimes a tent is a home when you're traveling gypsy and living on a rent fair site.
Yeah. Well, I sure hope to see you at Swans this year because I'm going there. But if not, I'll see you in the Yam Land someday or somewhere.
I wish we were going to go this year, but for some reason, that beginning part of August is harder for us to get out of Dodge than the middle part, which is sort of a scheduling thing. But we will come again. We'll just have to make the decision in advance so that we can clear the calendar for it. But we will do it again. But not this year.
That's what my wife says every night. We will come again.
We will do it again. One day, my good friend. Have hope. It's happened in the past, hasn't it?
Yeah. Don't stop and keep going. All right, Nick. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jerry.
I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, but I hope this never ends and goes on